In the early days of SNL, it seemed every host was part of an effort by Lorne to prove the show's worth to a different audience or demographic. Carlin, Simon, and Reiner all had their own fans, certainly, who tuned in based on their affinity for the host. Lorne didn't want the show to be entirely about the weekly celebrities coming by to host, but he knew that name recognition would be what got in his initial audience. By the time Robert Klein hosted Show 5 in 1975, he'd appeared, along with several other Season 1 hosts, on the short-lived but well-cast program Comedy Tonight, done HBO's first stand-up comedy special, and released several albums of material. He was popular, but not a household name. To me, it seems Lorne's aim with Klein was to demonstrate the type of up-and-coming, yet not unknown comedian SNL wanted to introduce to a wider audience. Klein was hip and had cachet with 30-somethings who knew stand-up, but was unknown enough to middle America to still make SNL seem like a showcase for new and exciting material. A win-win, really. So, based entirely on his style of monologue, mind you, the first thing I googled and researched for this video was, did Robert Klein do cocaine in the 70s? I mean, lots of people did, and let's face it, this guy seems high energy. He imitates a theremin a lot for somebody on plain black coffee. By my admittedly hasty 10 minutes of search engine work, though, I found no obvious reference to any drug use whatsoever by Klein. People on pure air with that much vim and vinegar puzzle me, frankly, but far be it for me to make assumptions. His material's kind of all over the place, talking to a lovably doofy imaginary bear, a strange abundance of animal humor, really. I don't quite know what to make of it. I'm familiar with Klein mostly as a character actor, and I was unaware he started his career as a stand-up and improvisational comedian. I can't say I loved his material, but you can't fault his enthusiastic delivery. He gets a second monologue, something the show was more inclined to do this first season when they had a stand-up as a host. It's about his college life, some stuff about reefer it's not really worth commenting on. Klein is likable, and he's obviously doing his very best as a host, but he doesn't quite click for me. This week lacks the magic of the Bergen episode, with only glimmers of that show's heart peeking through. He'd be invited back to host again in Season 3, though, so he must have made a pretty good impression on Lorne, if no one else. ABBA was the first and only music act, to my knowledge, to fully lip-sync a performance on SNL until Ashlee Simpson's debacle some 30 years later. Lorne said about ABBA, "That was Dick." He didn't say that as a qualitative judgment, mind you. He was referring to Dick Ebersol, the NBC executive who had helped get SNL on air but was fast becoming a thorn in Lorne's side. Lorne continues, "Dick was ABBA. That was all he cared about. He left the rest of the music to me and Howard, but with ABBA, he just wouldn't take no for an answer." As for the Titanic set, that was the idea, of course, of perpetual pettiness machine and writer Michael O'Donoghue. In Live from New York, writer Howard Shore admits, "O'Donoghue and I were always trying to book acts on the show and then do things to them. They were so happy to be on the show they didn't really notice. I remember when Robert Klein hosted, O'Donoghue put ABBA on a Titanic set and tried to drown them. He thought ABBA was kitsch." For their part, ABBA perform, or pretend to perform, SOS is their first number. I refuse to put any more time into telling you about it than they'd ended up playing it. Joy of Joys, they come back at the end of the show for a follow-up, are brutally tagged with this caption, and then are, sure enough, drowned to death during their performance of Waterloo. Come to think of it, the names of these songs might have been what gave the writers their brilliant plan. In any event, bravo to SNL for showing Dick Ebersol and the network what would happen if they meddled in the show's music guests in the future. A watery grave. I'm sure I won't change anyone's existing opinion of ABBA, but I don't see the big appeal, frankly. They certainly don't come off looking too great here. As a fan of the nuanced and orchestral music of Rufus Wainwright, I was utterly unprepared for his father Loudon, who knows 4 beginner guitar chords and is fueled by an inexplicable fury which could power a steamship. Perhaps I just don't get it, but his first number, Bicentennial, is a just plain awful song if you're asking me. The angry energy of his performance is bewildering, the song is amateurish, and the lyric disjointed. I suspect it's intended as a protest song, and there was surely plenty to protest, but I've no idea just exactly what he's on about. He does an admirable job of counterbalancing frickin' ABBA, I suppose, but that's about all he accomplishes. He comes back later, and I can't convey to you just how off-putting and strange this guy's manic vibe is. I can't play the actual song for you because I'll get a copyright strike, but believe me when I say he sounds as odd as he looks here, singing his second song, Unrequited to the Nth Degree, about, and I want to stress to you this, coming back to haunt you after he kills himself. The audience has absolutely no clue what to do with this dude threatening suicide in the key of G, and neither do I, frankly. Again, I just have to remark, one more time, on how odd it is that Rufus Wainwright is this man's son. Chevy's phone cold open is a barely concealed blowjob joke this week. They're inching towards offensive testing the waters. I'm Chevy and You're Not gets less of a response this week. Like most things SNL, that doesn't mean they'd stop doing it, only that they'd repeat and iterate on it until it became funny again. This week in topical humor, Ford is still clumsy, Secret Service agents are still wrestling people and things to the ground, Nixon still has no friends, and George Wallace will roll ahead to the nomination. We have several instances of a recurring sight gag where Chevy makes up a more interesting story to accompany a mundane photograph. For instance, the two Eisenhower kids are pictured with some servicemen, which Chevy reports are an execution squad preparing to kill them for their unforgivable dullness. Or this photo of a black athlete stretching, depicted as a hood ornament on George Wallace's limousine. Chevy does a Muhammad Ali joke so bad that even his charming mugging to the camera can't get the audience to laugh. Chase is often funnier when jokes don't land, but nothing saving this Ali gag, apparently. Another Jamitol ad, in which George Coe extols the virtues of his wife Jane Curtin, who he says is able to keep up with her outrageously demanding schedule because she takes Jamitol. In reality, Jane is just being worked to death by her piece-of-shit husband and can barely stay on her feet. I think this is a more straightforward and effective parody, closer in tone to the ubiquitous Geritol ads of the 60s than the earlier attempt this season with Chase and O'Donohue was, but it's still not what I'd call a laugh riot. We have another editorial reply in which Aykroyd delivers a heartfelt plea for energy conservation while Chevy mocks him stage right. These work, mostly because Chevy is so believable as an immature jerk. Chase wishes his real-life girlfriend Jacqueline Carlin a happy 17th birthday. He would later claim it was largely due to her reluctance to move to New York that he left SNL in its second season, although she did cameo in several first-season episodes. He also wishes functioning schizophrenic and producer Lorne Michaels a happy birthday and claims his show is soon to be replaced by hilarious test patterns of the 1960s. Update closes with another news for the hard of hearing! It still gets a great laugh. King Plubus has a migraine. As a migraine sufferer myself, the sound of Scred's stupid voice would definitely not do anything as curative for me, let me tell you. They try acupuncture, which, again, I have to guess was some sort of new fad at the time because it gets brought up a lot in these 70s sketches. And then they ask their god for help, only to find he's also busy, doing acupuncture. Whoopee. They have to have already realized this wasn't working. The audience claps politely when it ends, probably because it's over, but otherwise gives very little response. Definitely the worst thing award winner this episode. Chevy is a smarmy beauty pageant MC introducing winner Lorraine. She declines the title, saying,
"Well, I gotta tell you that I'm really super sorry, but I cannot accept this title. I mean, let's face it, it's just perpetuating a plastic morality, and it's a meat market, and I know I have a far out bod and everything."
She then puts all the regalia on Chevy, the crown, etc., and he begins confusedly to walk the stage singing "Here She Is, Miss America" to himself, and of course tripping off the end of the runway to deliver his line. Another of the pre-taped Pong pieces by Franken and Davis. They discuss their history midterm, which Franken is certain he scored well on. Turns out, though, he's a poor student as well as a poor Pong player. These are cute little pieces, which were, I'm sure, considered pretty neat at the time because of the newfound popularity of Pong. They were also probably pretty useful and cheap for the show as filler material. They are not, however, very funny. Shot in the style of an overwrought 40s murder melodrama, this sketch gives the audience just 1 minute to solve a murder Chevy confesses to in the first 10 seconds of the sketch. Aykroyd and Chase are both strong here, but the premise doesn't really work for me. Perhaps it was a parody of some sort of popular style of program at the time that I don't know about, but it kind of goes nowhere. A parody of the Bicentennial Minute films CBS aired throughout 1976. In this piece, Garrett, in full Bee regalia, discusses a notable moment in Bee history. The joke is entirely the pun title and the silly outfit. Poor Garrett doesn't really get very much good material unless it's directly related to race. I'm not the first to say that, I know, but it's true. In which Chevy, as beleaguered rocker Greg Allman, goes to great lengths to avoid discussing his recent breakup from Cher. He's repeatedly asked, "How's your love life?" to which he cannot give a straight answer. Like much topical humor about celebrities, I'm sure this was funny at the time, but it does very little for me today. In which noted director and asshole Sam Peckinpah, portrayed by Belushi, directs poor Gilda by hilariously beating her within an inch of her life. The joke here is that Peckinpah was notorious for his mercurial temperament and mistreatment of actors. I, for one, though, don't find anything funny about physical abuse, especially of Gilda Radner, or about the sketch itself, so I'm not going to talk about it any further. In a sort of takeoff on Vietnam War movies of the time, Klein and Belushi play exterminators on a job in a basement. Klein plays the role of a conscientious objector who doesn't think it's okay for them to kill God's creatures even though they're just roaches. Belushi tells him some sob story about how roaches killed his brother, man, which they totally didn't, to try to justify their slaughter, and then he tries to flush out the roaches so Klein can exterminate them. Klein freezes up, though. He can't do it. He tells Belushi about this book he's reading, The Eternal Crawl, that's taught him all about the history of roaches and that they're really pretty great creatures and shouldn't be killed, and the sketch is a mess, frankly, and even though I sort of get the point of it, I don't think it works very well. In the end, Belushi repents and decides to change his ways, but can't help squishing a few bugs on the way out. So Gilda, okay, is a fireman, okay? Helmet, axe coat, whole bit, all checks out. I don't understand this one. She delivers a cute, relatively straight-faced monologue that mostly sorta kinda not really works because she's so darn adorable. There's not really any jokes, there's not much to the sketch at all, really, just Gilda being likable. She reads us a bad poem about being a fireman, and then it's over. I'm no good on a deadline, but I think if I was given an entire week to write a sketch, and this is what I turned in, I might be disappointed in myself. Inflationary prices getting you down? It's an ad for a price gun that you take to the store and use to defraud the store. That's the joke. They get the look and tone of the ad right, so credit for that. I think this gets repeated later in the season. An interview segment with author Gilda debuting her Emily Latella character here, and host Jane Curtin. Emily's there to discuss her book, Tiny Kingdom, which she is unable to do without repetitively overusing numerous adjectives for the word small. Curtin realizes the interview is going nowhere and unceremoniously ends it. Latella would, of course, go on to become Gilda's breakout character and will return many times over the years. It's strange to think that such a long-running character got its start in such an underwhelming sketch, but there you have it. Another ad along the same lines as the one WNBC New York flubbed the prior week. Klein finishes his contributions as host with perhaps his best-known stand-up bit, a performance piece called I Can't Stop My Leg. It's just him as a denim-clad blues man singing about how he literally can't stop his leg from moving around in a distracting blues-like fashion. From what I understand, it usually runs quite a bit longer, but I think he sells the gag here without overstaying its welcome. I've already mentioned it, but I just have to marvel at how freaking mean it is to invite a band to travel halfway around the world to perform on your show, only to close out the night by mercilessly murdering them at sea. For their part, ABBA seem to be having too much fun to notice they're being mocked. Once they're done and drowned, Klein appears alone wearing a dressing gown for the closing outro and credits. There's a rumor his original plan had been to flash the audience, although I'm not entirely certain I believe that. Whatever his idea was, it's telling that the cast didn't spontaneously choose to join him on stage as they had Bergen the week before. I don't think anyone disliked him, certainly, but he also didn't endear himself to the crew the way she had. Next week would be an important show, albeit disappointing to several of the cast and writers due to the host's dismissive attitude toward their work. Stay tuned.